When someone asks me if Link and Zelda are in a romantic relationship, which has happened as my few friends are all nerds and we spend too much time talking about the story plots of video games, the answer I give is probably. It's not yes and it's not no, and I want to talk about why. As much as I have made fun of the shippers in past videos, and as much as I will probably continue to make fun of them in this video, I totally get why this ship is a thing, and I'm not trying to disprove romantic possibilities in this video. What I want to do here is show you how the story behind these games is deliberately told in a way that doesn't confirm or deny a romantic subplot, and how at the end of the day, it is up to each player to interpret whichever conclusion they think is more likely. I don't think that you're misinterpreting these game stories if you say that Link and Zelda are a couple, or if you say that they're not. You're misinterpreting the story if you refuse to accept that there is, by design, a level of ambiguity in this story, and that regardless of your own feelings, there isn't supposed to be one right answer. And I fully admit, I don't really like this method of storytelling. I prefer a much more concrete style of storytelling, so don't come at me and say that I'm biased in this. And I think that Link and Zelda would make an adorable couple, so don't come at me and say that I hate this ship either. But since most people assume that Link and Zelda are a couple, this video is basically just a defense of the non-shippers, and me showing you how they don't really have to jump through that many hoops to say that Link and Zelda aren't in a romantic relationship, and why you can really interpret this either way completely fairly. So why can't you know for sure if Link and Zelda are a couple? The simple answer is that it is never explicitly stated. Zelda games are rarely explicit about a lot of their lore, particularly character relationships, but this isn't a satisfying enough reason for a lot of people, so let's get into the nitty-gritty. Link and Zelda build a very strong and close connection in the time before Breath of the Wild and in the interim before Tears of the Kingdom. There's no denying that there's a close bond between the two. The question is whether this relationship is platonic or romantic. Now, there's plenty of hints throughout each of these games that might make you think Link and Zelda might be a couple, and we're going to look at those individually and kind of look at how they suggest it, but they by no means force you to think it. We'll start with Breath of the Wild and then go to Tears of the Kingdom, so there won't be any spoilers for Tears until midway through this video. In Breath of the Wild, Link and Zelda's meeting is less than graceful. Link has proved himself worthy of the Master Sword and is appointed as Princess Zelda's protective knight. Zelda, who has yet to unlock her sealing power, is reminded of her own failures whenever she sees Link, and also sees him as an extension of her father's overly controlling hand. In other words, Zelda despises having to be around Link all the time. Link's own feelings on the matter are more or less unknown at this point, however. This all changes in the memory titled Blades of the Yiga. In this scene, Link saves Zelda from the Yiga assassins. Link kills one of the Yiga and puts himself in harm's way to protect Zelda. And the way this scene is portrayed, the way that Zelda looks at Link, it has that very classic damsel in distress appearance, where the princess is not only saved but also emotionally swept off her feet, that she begins to fall for Link. But not only would this be a very quick change of feelings from contempt to romantic interest, but I think that there is a more reasonable explanation. In this moment, several things happen from Zelda's perspective before you can even entertain romantic notions. First of all, Zelda's been saved, and the relief alone would make this an appropriate response. She thought she was going to die, but in addition to this, Zelda's perception of Link has fundamentally shifted at this point. She sees Link in a completely different light. She has stopped seeing him as an extension of her father's will and a reminder of her own failure, and now sees him as someone who is willing to put himself in danger to protect her. This echoes Zelda's inquiry in the third memory, Resolve and Grief, where Zelda questions Link's ability with the Master Sword. Here, her hope is confirmed, and all of a sudden, Link no longer feels like a pawn of her father. He's a warrior and a defender, and quite possibly a friend. Zelda's diary states, and I quote, "Though I've been cold to him all this time, taking my selfish and childish anger out on him at every turn, still he was there for me. I won't ever forget that." So much has changed about how she thinks about Link that this long stare is, while bearing some possible romantic undertones, completely warranted, romantic or not. After this, for most of the memories between Blades of the Yiga and the memory called Despair, we don't get much more than the occasional, possibly flirtatious glance. The absolute strongest case of this, at least from my perspective, of this kind of maybe romantic glance, is in the memory titled Shelter from the Storm.
I see now why you would be the chosen one.
And I'd like it noted that even though this is, at least from my perspective, the most obvious odd glance I could find, it's very brief, and it's possible, although not likely, that it's not even intentional. And these kinds of passing glances are interesting to speculate about, but given that this was the most obvious of them that I could find, I think that the shipping fan community has chalked it up to more than it actually is. People look differently at people they care about, and even if Link and Zelda aren't romantically interested at this point, they would be quite close. Zelda has very few people in her life, and due to Link's job, the two would spend a lot of time together. Link has also saved Zelda's life by now at least once, and the two have a lot in common with the burdens that their superiors and peers have placed upon them. This memory itself mostly serves to show how the two are continuing to get to know each other better, and how they understand each other's hardships. If this scene is the closest Link and Zelda get to flirting, then I don't think that this is a detrimental point at all to the non-shippers. Now we come to the memory known simply as Despair. In this memory, we see Link and Zelda fleeing from Central Hyrule after the calamity, and we see this point where Zelda has a very justified emotional breakdown, which ends with her crying in Link's lap. And once again, some people have argued that this has romantic tones to it, and I would say again, not necessarily. The story is set up so that it can be interpreted in that way if you want, but it isn't evidence. In this scene, Zelda is more emotionally distressed than ever. In times of extreme trauma like this, physical contact with other people can be very comforting, especially a hug from a friend, or from family, or, yes, from a lover. At this point, though, Link is the only person she has left. It is entirely within reason that this is just how she's coping. The very next memory is also very interesting. In Zelda's Awakening, Zelda finally unlocks the sealing power when she steps between Link and one of the other Guardians. Now, in an earlier memory, it is suggested by Mipha that Zelda's kind of power can only be unlocked by thinking about someone you love. Mipha is cut off before she can actually say this, but that is what is implied. This scene seems to largely confirm Mipha's feelings for Link. But this has also, somewhat understandably, led many to believe that this is indeed the case and that Zelda's romantic feelings for Link are what finally caused her to manifest the sealing power. The problem with this theory is that it fundamentally misunderstands the nature of Zelda's power. When Zelda uses the power of sealing, the Triforce manifests for a moment, so we can reasonably conclude that Zelda is either drawing from the power of the Triforce, or that she actually has the Triforce by bloodline and is using it directly. Either way, this power would be subject to the Triforce's rules. Now, the Triforce is an interesting source of power. It doesn't have any sense of morality or emotion. It does not respond to things like love. The Triforce responds to anyone with an equal balance of the three virtues, those being power, wisdom, and courage. Up to this point, Zelda didn't meet those requirements, and so she could not use her sealing power. She had power in a royal sense as the Princess of Hyrule. She had wisdom, as she is portrayed as very scholarly, but what she lacked was courage. And in this desperate last-ditch effort to save the only friend she had left by making herself into a human shield between Link and the Guardians, she finally meets the requirements of courage. This could still be seen as a somewhat romantic scene, but the sealing power itself is not unlocked because of Zelda's romantic feelings. And if you're one of those morons who says that Zelda crying over Link's corpse is romantic, give me a break. Link was literally the only close friend that Zelda knew she had left, and she is decidedly not okay right now. This is a more than warranted response. Finally, we have the end of the game. Once again, like most of these scenes, this only looks romantic if you already assume that it is. It's been 100 years, Link and Zelda are the survivors of an apocalypse, and they're the only people left from their time. Romantic implications aside, Link is without a doubt Zelda's closest friend at this point. Link is still, to Zelda's knowledge, the only person she has left, and she just needs to know that her friend, her best friend, remembers her. You're free to interpret all of this as a romantic subplot if you like, but the point I'm trying to make here is that you can take either side of this argument without really jumping through any hoops. This aspect of the story is very deliberately undetermined. Okay, so now I'm getting into Tears of the Kingdom, so if you don't want spoilers, kindly get out. So, at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom, Link is going everywhere with Zelda. This is implied in the opening cutscene and confirmed later in Zelda's diary. Now, going everywhere with Zelda is still not inherently romantic. Link is still Zelda's sworn knight. It is his duty to protect her, and once again, romantic implications aside, Zelda is probably Link's closest friend. After the events of Breath of the Wild, it makes perfect sense that he'd be doing exactly what he's doing at the beginning of Tears of the Kingdom. They're survivors now. They've went through a kind of apocalypse. Nobody else went through what they went through. Even those who survived the calamity, such as Impa, won't have to live with the same loss and regret that these two do. And nobody else living was involved in the eventual destruction of Calamity Ganon. The amount of trauma that these two went through together leading up to the calamity is staggering. And the only two people who would really possibly understand the extent of that pain is each other. And that bond of trust between the two after defeating Calamity Ganon, regardless of whether there are romantic feelings, Link and Zelda would share a stronger bond with each other than some of us will ever experience in a lifetime. So the first maybe romantic looking thing, I don't think that it looks romantic, is Link trying to catch Zelda when she falls into the crevice below Hyrule Castle. This is, like so many of these, only romantic if you want to look at it this way. The same goes for mirroring of this event at the end of the game. Sure, you can interpret it as romantic if you want, but if it wasn't, Link would have done the exact same thing. The next scene is actually really interesting to look at. This is probably the first point at which I wondered if Link and Zelda were canonically in a relationship. There's this Dragon Tear memory called Zelda and Sonia, where Zelda is conversing with Sonia, as well as Rauru, and Link comes up in their conversation. And in this conversation, Zelda speaks very highly and very fondly of Link, because of course she does. But Rauru and Sonia take note of this and mention that they would like to meet Link, and also seem amused by Zelda's praise of Link. I weirdly think that this is the strongest romantic implication to be found in either game, because it's pretty easy to argue that this scene looks a lot like someone talking to their parents about their boyfriend. Add to this that Rauru and Sonia are related to Zelda and are acting as stand-in parents, and this is quite peculiar. This is why I said at the beginning of the video that Link and Zelda are probably a couple. There is an element of the unknown. It's a very deliberate element that is supposed to be there, but there are aspects of the story that at a surface level do appear romantic. There are a couple of legitimate alternative explanations for this scene, and I don't find either of them to be particularly compelling, but they are both plausible. The first is that Rauru and Sonia are more or less teasing Zelda. It's not uncommon that a boy and a girl of about the same age that get along well but are not romantically interested in each other are teased about being a great match for each other by their friends and relatives. I would know from personal experience this has happened to me. So it could just be teasing. It is a pretty boring answer, but it is an answer that holds water. Another more interesting and probably more well-founded possibility has to do with the larger narrative in these flashbacks. The main character doing the prodding in this scene, at least from my point of view, is Rauru. He's the one asking the questions for the most part. He takes great interest in Link upon hearing about his heroism and encourages Zelda to go on. I think it's possible that rather than thinking that, ooh, Zelda has a boyfriend, Rauru is recognizing that there is a new piece on the chessboard, so to speak, and he's inquiring about Link to find out if he could possibly be a useful ally in the future. The big pointer towards this being the case is that the main thing Rauru notes about Link is specifically how confident Zelda is in him, rather than her almost rambling praise or how she seems to miss him. Now, if there were no other evidence for this, then I would probably dismiss this as pure speculation. But there is something else that would suggest this theory to be the case. Later, in the Imprisoning War, Rauru sacrifices himself in order to temporarily seal Ganondorf. Rauru specifically states in that scene that Link will be the key to defeating Ganondorf, and that the reason he is sealing Ganondorf is to give Link a chance at that. This makes me think that in the previous scene, Rauru at least is possibly just pleased to see that there is someone else who can possibly help with this whole debacle. Moving on from this scene and its various possible interpretations, there is another popular theory floating around right now that Link and Zelda are living together at the start of Tears of the Kingdom, because it appears in Tears of the Kingdom that Zelda is living in a house that you can buy in a side quest in Breath of the Wild. This would obviously heavily suggest that they're in a relationship if it were true, but I do not think that this is the case. In fact, I have an entire video on the subject that I will leave a link to in the description if you want to see all the various reasons that these two are not living together. That video lays out several independent reasons for why Link is not living in that house by the time of Tears of the Kingdom. I do think there is a better version of that video to be made. There are 1 or 2 points that I think I could have explained or fleshed out better, but most of the points do hold up pretty well. A point that I didn't make in that video is that not all side quests are necessarily canon. I historically always assumed that all side quests were canon, but there's a lot of characters that don't recognize Link in Tears of the Kingdom that would if you had done their side quests in Breath of the Wild. I think this is Nintendo's way of saying which side quests canonically occurred and which did not. Bolson is one of the NPCs that doesn't recognize Link, and Bolson is the NPC who sells the Hateno house in Breath of the Wild. So if my theory is right, then Link buying the Hateno house isn't canonical. I know there's Tarrytown in Tears of the Kingdom, and there's a side quest associated with it in Breath of the Wild that doesn't unlock until you buy the house, but Tarrytown would have been built with or without Link eventually. It just would have taken longer and may not have transpired until after Link defeated Calamity Ganon. This would also make sense because why on earth would Link, canonically, go out of his way to purchase a house in Breath of the Wild? He'd have to go out of his way to cut down a bunch of trees and collect a lot of cash, and Zelda's power is waning by the day, so this unnecessary side tangent to buy a house doesn't make a lot of sense anyway if you're considering what's canon. Also, in-game evidence aside, and I just know I'm going to get some angry comment, or 5 angry comments for saying this, but Link and Zelda are both very clearly religious, once you consider that Zelda's sealing power is repeatedly tied to Hylia as well as the Triforce, and Link increases his strength through prayer in such a literal way that it's part of the game mechanics. And even in works of fiction, a vast majority of religions think of adultery as a bad thing, so it's very unlikely that they would be living in the same house. They would probably hold themselves to a higher moral standard. You may not like that reason, but it's there. Moving on from that, we finally also have the ending of Tears of the Kingdom. Zelda is turned back into a Hylian, Link dives to save her, and this follows the same logic as the intro scene. But later on in this scene, Zelda says that when she felt something like a warm, loving embrace, she woke up. And people assume that this is referring to when Link catches Zelda on the descent. Okay, so first of all, love isn't always romantic. We can love family, friends, we even say that we love objects. I love ice cream and Mountain Dew and barbecue sauce and instrumental music. But I'm not in love romantically with any of those things. Second, most of these scenes I've picked out can be interpreted in a romantic or non-romantic way. But much like Zelda's awakening in Breath of the Wild, this scene is fundamentally misunderstood. In this case, it's because people ignore context. Zelda had said previously that she had been sleeping all this time, and then as a part of the same thought goes on to say that she woke up when she felt something like a warm, loving embrace. Zelda doesn't appear to wake up mid-fall. She regains consciousness only once Link has already carried her out of the lake. This awakening is, I think, pretty clearly meant to be a metaphor for her time as an immortal dragon, and her waking up refers to being undraconified. Zelda doesn't say that she felt an embrace, rather that she felt something like an embrace. This quote-unquote warm, loving embrace is then in reference to Rauru and Sonia channeling their power through Link to transform Zelda. And Link was a passive player in that exchange. We see that his Zonai arm moves independently of his own control during the event. Zelda is referring to a more parental kind of love here. Alright, that's all the biggies. You're free to point out any scenes that I missed in the comments, and maybe I'll make a follow-up. Probably not, though. The point of this video is that for some questions in Legend of Zelda, including Link and Zelda's possible relationship, the answer isn't yes or no, and it's not supposed to be yes or no. It's maybe. At best, it's probably. But it's definitely not definitely. And the story is set up that way intentionally, so if you want to think they're in a relationship, or if you think that they're not, both are fine. Neither one's confirmed, regardless of whether you like that style of storytelling or not. I don't like that kind of storytelling, but I'm also just tired of people saying that it's for sure one thing, when the only thing for sure about it is that it's not for sure. Alright, that's the end of my rant. I hope you enjoyed. If you didn't, I don't know, hit the dislike button, unsubscribe, leave long, angry, disjointed, and poorly argued comments in the comments section. I don't really care. But I hope you did enjoy, or at least found my thoughts interesting. Bye, nerds.